Another shooting by an ICE agent in Minneapolis touches off actual violent riots in Minneapolis. We'll get into all of that, plus the latest in Iran and Venezuela. First, the wait is almost over. Episodes 1 and 2 of the Pendragon cycle, Rise of the Merlin, begin streaming on Daily Wire Plus in 1 week. A legend 1,500 years in the making, brought to life as a full-scale cinematic epic after 3 years of production across 2 continents. Set before King Arthur, before Camelot, before the legend you think you know. Episodes 1 and 2 premiere January 22nd exclusively at Daily Wire Plus. Be among the first to experience the Pendragon cycle, Rise of the Merlin. Join right now at dailywire.com/Pendragon. Well, a second shooting by ICE of somebody who actually attacked an ICE officer has now broken into the news. Last night, there was violence against the police. There were some riots in Minneapolis. This all started, according to the New York Times, when a federal agent shot and injured a man in Minneapolis on Wednesday evening, according to federal officials, an incident that touched off hours of clashes between protesters and law enforcement officers and came just 1 week after an immigration agent killed a woman in the city. Now, of course, that is typical New York Times coverage. The agent shot the woman after she attempted to drive her car at him, or at least he perceived that as the case. Tricia McLaughlin, a spokeswoman for the DHS, who of course is on this show just a couple of days ago, said in a statement that federal agents were trying to arrest a man from Venezuela who was in the country illegally in a targeted traffic stop around 6:50 p.m. Apparently, he fled from agents. When the officer caught up to him, according to McLaughlin, he began to resist and violently assault the officer, and 2 people came out of a nearby building and, along with the man who is being sought, attacked the officer with a snow shovel and a broom handle. Well, I mean, you do that, you're going to get shot. That's just the way that law enforcement works. Attack an officer with a weapon, you will be shot. The officer feared for his life and fired shots, striking the man, whom agents were seeking, in the leg. The agent and the man who were shot were in the hospital, according to McLaughlin. The other 2 people she accused of attacking the agent were apparently in custody already. The city suggested that the person shot had non-life-threatening injuries. Here's Fox News reporting on the situation last night.
ICE was going after a Venezuelan illegal alien who had been caught and released at the border by the Biden administration in 2022. That person crashed into a parked car, got out and fled. ICE was chasing him down. And then while they were wrestling on the ground, 2 people came out of a nearby apartment and then started attacking the ICE officer with shovels. And during that ambush attack, that is when the officer pulled out his weapon, fired, and hit one of the suspects, who again is stable.
Well, this prompted the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, to then take some gasoline and pour it right on the fire. He went on X last night and he tweeted, "State investigators have been on the scene in North Minneapolis. I know you're angry. I'm angry. What Donald Trump wants is violence in the streets. But Minnesota will remain an island of decency, of justice, of community, and of peace. Don't give him what he wants." So he's saying don't get violent, but he's kind of winking and nodding at the violence. He actually put out a TV statement that essentially urged on the protesters. Here's what it sounded like.
Let's be very, very clear. This long ago stopped being a matter of immigration enforcement. Instead, it's a campaign of organized brutality against the people of Minnesota by our own federal government. Last week, that campaign claimed the life of Renee Nicole Good. We've all watched the video. We've all seen what happened. And yet, instead of conducting an impartial investigation so we can hold accountable the officer responsible for Renee's death, the Trump administration is devoting the full power of the federal government to finding an excuse to attack the victim and her family. So tonight, let me say once again to Donald Trump and Kristi Noem, end this occupation. You've done enough. Let me say 4 critical things to the people of Minnesota. 4 things I want you to hear as you watch the news and look out for your neighbors. First, Donald Trump wants this chaos. He wants confusion. And yes, he wants more violence on our streets. We cannot give him what he wants. We must protest loudly, urgently, but also peacefully. Indeed, as hard as we will fight in the courts and at the ballot box, we cannot and will not let violence prevail. You're angry? I'm angry. Angry is not a strong enough word, but we must remain peaceful. Second, you are not powerless. You are not helpless, and you are certainly not alone. All across Minnesota, people are learning about opportunities, not just to resist, but to help people who are in danger. Thousands upon thousands of our fellow Minnesotans are going to be relying on mutual aid in the days and weeks to come, and they need our support. Tonight, I want to share another way you can help. Witness. Help us establish a record of exactly what's happening in our communities. You have an absolute right to peacefully film ICE agents as they conduct these activities. So carry your phone with you at all times. And if you see these ICE agents in your neighborhood, take out that phone and hit record. Help us create a database of the atrocities against Minnesotans, not just to establish a record for posterity, but to bank evidence for future prosecution.
Minneapolis then put out a statement demanding that ICE leave the city. Okay, I should put it clearly here. There is no power in Minneapolis for them to eject ICE agents from the city. That is not how federal law enforcement works. You cannot just tell federal agents enforcing federal law to leave the city. And so the Minneapolis government, the Minnesota state government have been ramping all of this up. So it's not a surprise that last night after this shooting, which again, it sounds like the ICE agent was literally attacked, like physically assaulted before he shot and wounded the person they were attempting to arrest. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. The agitators, protesters turned into rioters last night. Already coming up more on these riots, violent altercations in Minneapolis. First, getting a wide variety of whole food ingredients into my diet. It's a priority for me this year, especially with all of the work travel. Our sponsor, Balance of Nature's whole health system, makes it simple. Their convenient blend of fruits and veggies in easy-to-take capsules is kosher and ensures I'm getting essential nutrients every day without the hassle of prep work or meal planning. It's an effortless way to support my wellness goals while managing a busy on-the-go lifestyle. Balance of Nature's whole health system supplements are incredibly versatile and easy to work into your daily routine. The fiber and spice supplement blends smoothly into your favorite drinks, adding that warm aromatic depth from its spice blend. And if you prefer, you can even open up the fruits and veggies capsules and mix the powder directly into a smoothie or sprinkle it over your meals. What makes these supplements special is they're packed with 47 ingredients from 100% real whole foods, veggies, spices, fibers, everything from psyllium husk and flaxseed to cinnamon, turmeric, mango, pineapple, blueberries, shiitake, mushroom, spinach, kale, cayenne pepper, and so much more. It's a simple way to give your body the nutrition it needs every single day. I bring Balance of Nature with me on the road. I've been doing some travel this week. And, it's hard to keep healthy when you're doing that. If you don't have the right stuff in your body, that's what Balance of Nature does for me. This New Year's, lock in 50% off for 1 year. When you subscribe to the whole health system supplements as a preferred customer, head on over to balanceofnature.com. According to Fox News, agitators and federal law enforcement clashed in Minneapolis on Wednesday night into Thursday morning after a second ICE-involved shooting in the city, as local officials continue to demand the agency leave. An ICE agent shot that alleged illegal immigrant in the leg. This comes after the incident with Renee Good, obviously. Protests continued on Wednesday after the latest shooting, with demonstrators using horns and whistles and officers deploying tear gas and pepper balls. There were at least 100 people at the scene, where officers were dispersing pepper spray, throwing pepper balls, using flashbangs as rioters tossed items at the agents. Demonstrators were yelling at ICE to leave the city and holding signs with phrases like F ICE. The Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara said the crowd was committing unlawful acts, including throwing fireworks at the officers, and urged people to leave immediately. And we do have some tape of Minneapolis rioters looting a gun locker from an ICE vehicle. They apparently were able to break into an ICE vehicle, and they got into the gun locker that's in the trunk of the vehicle. Here's what that looked like. So, things are going well in Minneapolis. And of course, this has been pressed forward by a Democratic Party which insists that basic law enforcement action against illegal immigrants, particularly criminal illegal immigrants, is some sort of violation of the American Compact that puts you apparently in league with like the Iranian Ayatollahs in terms of your tyranny. That is a case that is currently being made by the chair of the Democratic National Committee, which is nuts. That is nuts. So he did an interview with the Wall Street Journal. And in this interview, he said, essentially, that the Trump administration is similar to Tehran, to the Ayatollahs in Iran. On social media, he wrote, quote, "From Tehran to my birthplace in Minneapolis, people are rising up against systems that wield violence without accountability. Solidarity across borders means opposing authoritarian power everywhere and defending the right to live free from fear and state violence." By the way, tremendous irony in the leader of the DNC, a party that has treated Hamas, Hezbollah, all of the various terror arms of Iran as some sort of half political organization, treated the Iranian government as a quasi-innocent in the region, now citing Iran as the repressive power to compare to President Trump, the president who actually struck Iran back in June of last year, blowing up their nuclear facility at Fordo. Also amazing to just compare, the Ayatollahs who are legitimately shooting people in the streets. And we'll get to that in a bit. Probably have shot thousands of people to death in the streets with ICE agents going out and enforcing criminal law who are obstructed by benighted people, misguided people, and then bad incidents ensue. He wrote, quote, if comparing the U.S. to Iran makes you angry, ask why. Killing protesters. Killing protesters? The Trump administration is not unleashing ICE to mass shoot protesters. That's insane. That's psychotic. And it's disgusting, by the way. Ken Martin comparing, again, the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, unleashing live fire on protesters en masse, attempting to arrest and then possibly execute thousands of protesters in Iran, with the Renee Good situation in which officers let her obstruct traffic for 3 full minutes while they were attempting an ICE operation, and then went to her car and tried to remove her from the car to arrest her, and then she hit the gas while an officer was in front of her car and got shot in the process. Those are not even remotely the same thing, and Ken Martin is out of his mind. He's just out of his mind. He said, killing protesters, crushing dissent, kidnapping and disappearing legal citizens, ignoring courts, threatening critics, terrorizing communities. That's authoritarian behavior anywhere. That is insane. Absolutely insane, obviously. And the fact that Ken Martin would say such things is demonstrative of how disconnected the Democratic Party is from reality at its top levels. He's not the only one who's saying this, by the way. Representative Eugene Vindman of Virginia, he said the same thing on CNN.
They're protesting largely peacefully on the streets, and they're being attacked and murdered. And I think, there's an irony, obviously, in what we see with ICE on America's streets. But just to stay focused on Iran, I think it means putting enormous pressure on the regime so they recognize that suppressing their own population through violence is not going to work.
Again, attempting to compare the Trump administration to Iran is nutty. It is nutty that there's irony in the Iran. There's no irony here. These are not comparative situations. There's not comparable. Peter Baker of the New York Times was on MS Now. Again, that's what we now call MSNBC, MS Now, which again sounds like a charity for multiple sclerosis. In any case, Peter Baker did the same thing.
People are watching this split screen situation of mass protests in Tehran and mass protests in Minneapolis. And of course, they're looking to see, how a president handles each of them. And while you really can't, compare the substance of these two, very important issues happening for different parts of the planet, you can, I think, look at the rule of thumb that Donald Trump brings to it. And I think the rule of thumb is pretty simple. If you're protesting against a regime he disfavors, he opposes, then you're heroes. If you're protesting him or his policies, then you're illegitimate. You're radicals. You're radical left lunatics.
Well, I mean, yes, if you protest, that's ridiculous. If you are protesting the Ayatollah's regime, the one where they murder you if you protest, the one where women are forced to wear hijab, the one where they spread terrorism all over the region while impoverishing their people to the tune of no water or power in their capital. They were talking about literally emptying out their entire capital just a couple of months ago. I don't see how that is comparable to you looting gun lockers in ICE vehicles in Minneapolis. Why do Democrats, why does the left have to embrace this equivalence? By the way, they would not even embrace, as I say, the reverse equivalence. The truth is that they make excuses on a consistent basis for some of the worst people in the Middle East and rip into governments that attempt to fight those people in the Middle East. There's been significantly more ire from the mainstream media at Israel for its action in the Gaza Strip, targeted action against a terrorist group hiding behind civilians, than there has been against the Iranian government thus far. Meanwhile, Ilhan Omar, she's out there saying that Renee Good died not because she was involved in an altercation with law enforcement, in which apparently there are reports that the officer who was hit by her car, and he was hit by her car, actually suffered some internal bleeding. Here she was saying that she died because she chose love and solidarity over fear. That's weird because, I think that a vast majority of Americans every single day choose love and solidarity over fear and don't die in altercations with ICE officers after hitting the gas and hitting the officer with the bumper of their car after obstructing ICE operations for 3 minutes. The enemy of good sense is the failure to just speak basic truth. Okay, the basic truth about the Renee Good situation is that it is a tragedy. And also, Renee Good was involved in federal crime. That is a federal crime to obstruct law enforcement in the pursuit of its legal obligations. But instead, we're now going to pretend that Renee Good just apparently died while walking down the street doing nothing at all. She was not involved in anything. It was just a pure murder. Here's Ilhan Omar doing her routine.
In the face of state-sanctioned violence, we have organized and protected each other. That is what Renee stood for. She died because she chose love and solidarity over fear, and we will make sure the world never forgets her name.
Why? Why can't we just say the truth about this situation? You want to cool the temperature? You want to make sure that the law actually gets enforced? That's what most Americans want. A cooler temperature and the law gets enforced. You know how that could happen? Really easily? Cooperation with law enforcement in the pursuit of legal duties. That's how that would happen. But there is a deeper agenda at work, of course, and that deeper agenda has to do with a democratic point of view that suggests that importation of large people from outside the United States inherently makes the United States culturally stronger. They don't even believe in the economic point. They just like the idea that more immigrants, particularly from third world countries, somehow make the country culturally stronger in some way. Pramila Jayapal, the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, yesterday, she suggested that America was built by Somalis, Indians, Latinos, and Africans. I mean, like equally, or are there proportions? What do white people have to do with any of this? This sort of language is so obfuscatory and dumb. Truly dumb. It does not enlighten. It confuses. If she is saying that the country was built by Somalis in the same way that it was built by African Americans, meaning like American descendants of slaves, that is ridiculous. Or that it was built by Somalis the same way that it was built by Latino immigrants to the United States. And also, again, do like white people from a wide variety of countries have anything to do with this? How do we stack this up? Do we have to have rankings? Do we have to have like NCAA rankings of the importance of various races in building the country? Is that the way we're supposed to do this? Apparently so, according to Pramila Jayapal.
The majority of Americans across the country, regardless of political party, know that immigrants from all over the world, Somalia, India, wherever they're from, Latin America, Africa, that immigrants have built this country and make this country what it is today.
Yeah, these like broad statements, immigrants have built this country, like which ones? And there's some immigrants who have built the country for sure. And there are some immigrants who are really terrible for the country. And promoting the idea that there is this thing called immigrants, just a class, like a giant class of immigrants, and that all immigrants are of equal merit in entering the United States is stupid. It is baseline idiocy. It is a category that is far too broad. It is both over-inclusive and under-inclusive. It's over-inclusive in the sense that it includes a lot of people who shouldn't be here, and it's under-inclusive in the sense that a lot of the people she thinks of as immigrants are actually American citizens who are children of immigrants. But again, this is all part of a broader agenda, which is just don't enforce immigration law. Senator Chris Van Hollen, a truly dunderheaded senator from Maryland, was out there doing an ICE out rally, meaning just ICE should be defunded, suggesting that the United States government should simply take away the money from ICE. So I guess no interior immigration enforcement.
These are people like Kristi Noem, directed by people like Stephen Miller, people like J.D. Vance, who was lying through his teeth the other day, and of course headed by the liar-in-chief, the lawbreaker-in-chief, Donald Trump. So we are here to say not one more dime for Donald Trump's ICE operations.
And now, there's only one problem. The ICE operations that are currently being pursued are very, very similar, in fact, to some of the ICE operations that were pursued during the Obama administration. This is a point that's being made by Todd Lyons. He's the director of ICE. Here he was yesterday.
You know, ICE is doing our same law enforcement mission we're doing everything the same, if not better than we did back and then. And I can, again, firsthand experience. But unfortunately, there is just such a hatred for President Trump right now that it's blocking the views of what law enforcement is doing, and it's really putting the target on ICE.
Yeah, he's right about that. Again, there's this narrative that is being promoted by the Democrats and by the legacy media. The narrative is that ICE is willy-nilly going and just mass arresting people for no reason at all based on the color of their skin. And it's not true. It's not true. The vast majority of people that ICE is detaining, and then pretty much everybody that ICE is actually arresting after detention, those are people who are criminal illegal immigrants. They have another crime on their ledger sheet, on their rap sheet, other than just entering the country illegally. This is a point that J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, made on X, quote, "This argument is just entirely fake for two reasons. One, in the Obama administration, they counted being turned away at the border as a deportation. A person would show up, be sent back, and counted as a deportation. We have to do deportations from the interior of the country because Biden and Harris let them walk in. Two, in the cities that are not sanctuary cities, the deportation process is orderly and normal, like most law enforcement. In Minneapolis and a few other sanctuary jurisdictions, local jurisdictions and a few left-wing agitators have decided to wage war on all immigration enforcement officers. They are hoping a little chaos will convince us to give up on immigration enforcement. They are wrong. That is correct." Well, in any case, if this sort of violence continues in Minneapolis, the president has now said that he will invoke the Insurrection Act. He put out a statement on Truth Social earlier this morning, quote, "If the corrupt politicians of Minnesota don't obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists from attacking the patriots of ICE who are only trying to do their job, I will institute the Insurrection Act, which many presidents have done before me, and quickly put an end to the travesty that is taking place in that once great state. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Trump." Now, again, if there are riots and if the local authorities not only refuse to quell that, but they're actually seeming to facilitate it, then this is a completely legitimate use of the Insurrection Act to put down, again, the language that Walz is using right here, and it has been using for days, the language used by Jacob Fry, ICE out, we're going to obstruct the procedures of the federal government. I mean, that's a pretty good time to invoke the Insurrection Act to protect your agents in doing what they need to do. This is, by the way, having a large-scale impact on immigration to the United States generally. It turns out that net migration is probably negative at this point in time, according to the Brookings Institute, meaning that fewer people are attempting to cross the border, both legally and illegally. So more people are now leaving than people who are coming in because out-migration is so high. So you still have relatively high levels of in-migration, but you also have very high levels of out-migration at this point. And net, it seems as though there are more people leaving than coming in at this point. Some of that is ICE removals. Some of it is voluntary exits. And some of it is sort of normal out-migration, just people who decided to go home. The U.S. is also freezing visa processing for some 75 countries, including Somalia, Russia, and Iran. That is according to Fox News. A State Department memo, seen first by Fox News Digital, directs consular officers to refuse visas under existing law while the department reassesses screening and vetting procedures. Countries include Somalia, Russia, Afghanistan, Brazil, Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Nigeria, Thailand, Yemen, and more. The pause will begin January 21st, will continue indefinitely until the department conducts a reassessment of immigrant visa processing. So 75 countries, the immigration will be paused. Obviously, the Trump administration taking a very strong stance on migration to the United States after years and years of open borders under Joe Biden. Okay, meanwhile, the other big story of the day, obviously, is what continues to happen in Iran. So, just so we know, as of 48 hours ago, and again, we don't know everything that's going on in Iran because the internet has been shut off. So anything the Iranian government is telling you could very well just be a lie. If they were not worried about transparency, they would not be shutting off the internet for 6 days at this point, which is insane. By the way, they're not just shutting off the internet. They're shutting off international phone calls. They're shutting off domestic phone calls in Iran. That's how worried they are about the uprising that is occurring. Here is some video that escaped. This is from Wednesday, showing Iranian security forces firing directly into crowds. Last night, Iran closed its airspace in expectation of a possible American strike because President Trump, of course, had said that help was on the way. Yesterday, Iran actually threatened the president of the United States. They put out a statement suggesting that there would be another assassination against Trump, and this time it would succeed. That was the Islamic Republic State TV. They aired an image of President Trump after an attempted assassination with a Persian message reading, "This time the bullet won't miss." So, yeah, Iran, not exactly a trustworthy state. However, yesterday, President Trump announced that the other side claimed that the killing of Iranians had stopped. Here's the president of the United States yesterday afternoon at the White House.
We've been told that the killing in Iran is stopping, and it's stopped, and it's stopping. And there's no plan for executions or an execution or executions. So I've been told that on good authority. We'll find out about it. I'm sure if it happens, we'll all be very upset.
And well, he also discussed the possibility of military action yesterday. He declined to say who offered those assurances. He added that there were supposed to be a lot of executions. The executions had been postponed. Now, we're hearing a lot of mixed reports. Some of the reports suggest that the killing has stopped, but one of the reasons the killing has stopped, apparently, is because the Iranian government has put tanks and troops in the streets, and if you walk outside, they will just shoot you, which is one reason why people are not out in the streets. So that is not the Iranian government going weapons down against their protesters. It is them going full-on weapons up against their protesters and threatening that if you put your foot on the street, you will die, which is not precisely, I think, what the president was trying to achieve when he wanted the shooting to stop. And unclear at this point what the president's intent is with regard to action against Iran. And of course, any action has to be carefully calibrated to achieve its desired result. There was a report yesterday, I believe, from the Washington Post talking about the president saying that if there are strikes available, they should obviously have maximum impact, meaning possibly the decapitation of the regime. That he doesn't want to do a sort of pinprick Obama-style strike, hit a camel in the ass and walk away. And with that said, if nothing is done, then obviously the president's red line has been crossed pretty much willy-nilly by the Iranians. Remember that the president did say last week, before the shooting began, that if the Iranians were to shoot people en masse, then it would necessitate action. And then they did. Possibly over 10,000 people. We still don't know the full numbers. We know at least thousands of people. The question is how many thousands of people. Iran temporarily postponed some public executions because they don't want the president taking action. There was news yesterday that non-essential troops had been moved away from Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar, presumably as a way to shield them from possible Iranian retaliation. And then they were stood down, and a lot of those soldiers ended up back on the Al-Udeid Air Base. So in other words, there's just a lot going on right now. We actually don't know what is going on. We don't know what options are on the table. There's supposed to be, apparently, a meeting of the United Nations Security Council called by the United States on Iran. Totally useless, by the way. Totally useless. Like, if this is a substitute for some sort of concerted action, I don't see it. Going to Russia and China to utter some empty condemnations while they continue to fund the oil coffers of Iran isn't going to accomplish a lot. The UN, of course, the Mos Eisley of international politics, a wretched hive of scum and villainy. According to the AP, they scheduled an emergency meeting on Thursday to discuss Iran's deadly protests at the request of the United States. And I don't even know why the United States is bothering with that. The UN is trash. It has always been trash. President Trump hailed as good news reports that a death sentence has been lifted for an Iranian shopkeeper arrested in a violent crackdown on protests. But again, if the tacit deal here is Iran can shut down the protests by threatening to shoot everyone, and all they have to do is not publicly execute people, they'll just wait a couple of weeks and then shoot them in the back room, that doesn't really solve the problem in any real way. And again, it is possible that the president is pursuing other options. Cyber operations, airlifts of weaponry, attacks on the Iranian ghost ships that have been traveling around the globe in violation of sanctions. There are a lot of options that are on the table. And so you wouldn't want to forecast what those are. Plus, the president does like to play a poker hand pretty close to the chest here. You'll recall that there's a lot of speculation that he was not going to hit the Fordo nuclear facility. And in fact, there were open announcements that negotiations were probably going to take place. And then he hit the Fordo nuclear facility. So it could be that we are hearing different messages publicly than what is being planned privately. Suffice it to say that if what is happening publicly is the end result, then the Iranians will have gotten away with it. If what happens publicly is that the Iranians, again, were able to kill some 10,000 people, 12,000 people over the course of a few days to no real effect, then it would behoove, honestly, everyone. It was bad when Barack Obama would draw red lines and then they would be crossed because it violated the credibility of the United States. I think President Trump knows that and knows that really, really well. The G7 is warning of more sanctions. I mean, again, the Iranian economy is already trashed. You can trash it further. That might prevent the IRGC from being able to pay off its sort of top lieutenants. That's one possibility here. Meanwhile, the Iranian foreign minister appeared on Fox News where he proceeded, his name is Abbas Araghchi, he proceeded to blame the Israelis for Iranians in the streets protesting.
The reason I have to explain, and this is important, why they started to shoot at people, for one reason, they wanted to increase the number of deaths. Why? Because President Trump has said that if there are killings, he would intervene. And they wanted to drag him into this conflict. And that was exactly an Israeli plot. They wanted to drag the President of the United States in this conflict. So they started to increase the number of deaths by killing ordinary people, by killing police officers, by starting a kind of, fighting inside the different cities.
Okay, so the claim of the Iranian government, knowing full well about the horseshoe right, that is very fond of these sorts of conspiracy theories. The claim of the Iranian government, preying on precisely that, is that the Israelis infiltrated the crowds and started shooting soldiers, or that they themselves shot Iranian civilians in order to increase the death toll. Evidence provided? Zero. Of course. A point that Bret Baier made when he said that is not true. Like what you're saying. So your suggestion is that the Israelis precipitated the shooting while your own forces are literally mowing people down. Bret Baier was properly skeptical of the foreign minister. And then Araghchi warned the United States not to repeat the mistake they made in June. By the way, the mistake they made in June was bombing the Fordo nuclear facility and setting back the Iranian nuclear program by many, many years. So it wasn't such a mistake, actually.
My message is do not repeat the same mistake that you did in June. If you try a failed experience, you will get the same result. In June, you destroyed the facilities, the machines, but the technology cannot be bombed, and the determination also cannot be bombed. Now, Iran proved to be ready for negotiation, for diplomacy. We have proved that in the past 20 years, in 2015, in 2025, every time. But it was the U.S. who always escaped from diplomacy, who cut the diplomacy and opted for war. My message is, between war and diplomacy is a better way, although we don't have any positive experience from the United States, but still diplomacy is much better than war.
You'll notice that even here, he is admitting, number one, in this interview, he admitted that at least hundreds, thousands of people had been shot. He also admits right there, that their determination to move toward nuclear facilities maintains, which is incredible. You get bombed, and you're saying the United States did the wrong thing in bombing you. And then you say, our determination remains to develop nuclear capacity. Anyone who believes that the Iranian government requires civilian and nuclear infrastructure, you're out of your mind. They're one of the most oil and natural gas-rich regions on planet Earth, and they are not concerned about, say, green environmentalist issues. Absolute nuttiness. Abbas Araghchi denied on Fox News that Iran intended to execute the protesters. He said hanging is out of the question. Again, if you believe the Iranian regime about pretty much anything, then I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you, since they have not held to any commitment that they have ever made. But, we'll see where things go from here. And we will see if any sort of, if what the Iranian government said was happening, meaning it's all calm and peaceful. Everybody went home. Nobody is worried about what's going on in Iran anymore. You would imagine they would turn the internet back on. Pretty good indicator that we are not being told the full truth by the Iranian government when the internet remains off. Meanwhile, while conflict engulfs the Middle East, Venezuela continues to be an interesting development. The president of the United States put out a statement yesterday via Truth Social about a conversation he held with the current dictator of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez. And she is the current dictator of Venezuela. She's not a democratically elected leader. She is, of course, aligned with Nicolas Maduro. The question is whether there is a plan to basically squeeze her such that the United States is able to eventually achieve elections in Venezuela, along with the economic transition that would be necessary. The president put out a statement, quote, "This morning I had a very good call with the interim president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez. We're making tremendous progress as we help Venezuela stabilize and recover. Many topics were discussed, including oil, minerals, trade, and of course, national security. This partnership between the United States of America and Venezuela will be spectacular for all. Venezuela will soon be great and prosperous again, perhaps more so than even before." There are reports today that when it comes to Venezuela, the United States may be attempting to use private contractors in order to secure a lot of the oil facilities that would actually be necessary in order to ensure economic security there. According to CNN, the Trump administration is preparing to use private military contractors to protect oil and energy assets in Venezuela rather than deploying U.S. troops, according to two sources familiar with the plans, setting up a potential boon for security firms with experience in the region and ties to the administration. While President Trump has not ruled out a possible U.S. military presence in Venezuela, sources close to the president say he's wary of putting American boots on the ground for an extended period of time. Not a shock there. The president does not like the idea of gigantic numbers of American troops on the ground in places like Venezuela. And using contractors here is a pretty interesting workaround. Multiple private security companies are jockeying apparently to get involved in the U.S. presence in Venezuela. Interest is high given the potential payday. The United States could end up spending a lot of money on this sort of thing. However, it is important to recognize when it comes to Venezuela that the actual impact of getting rid of Maduro and essentially seizing control of their oil resources is to cut China out of the loop completely. This is a point made in the Wall Street Journal today. For years, China made inroads into Latin America, coaxing countries to abandon support for Taiwan with loans to build roads, ports, rail lines, making significant purchases of commodities like soybeans and oil, mining metals such as copper. According to the Wall Street Journal, Maduro was China's most important ally, an anti-American leader with oil resources, earning Venezuela the rare distinction of an all-weather partnership. That's China's highest diplomatic honor and a status held by no other country in Latin America. Now, Beijing is no longer seeking to make new advances into the region in the near term. Instead, the discourse in China's policymaking circles has shifted toward a potential trade-off. If the Western Hemisphere belongs to the Americans, the Taiwan Strait belongs to the Chinese. And it'll be interesting to see whether the Trump administration goes along with this. And this has always been a sort of fascinating conversation happening in Trumpian foreign policy circles. And it's unclear what Venezuela sort of means. Is Venezuela a muscular attempt by the Trump administration to intervene in a strategically important part of the world? And does it mean that the United States will also intervene in strategically important parts of the world that are not in the Western Hemisphere? Does it mean that if China tries to take Taiwan, the United States will try to deter that? Does it mean the United States will continue to work with NATO to deter Russian aggression in Eastern Europe? Does it mean that the United States has an interest in preventing further Iranian aggression? Right, these are open questions. Or, as China apparently seems to believe, is this the beginning of a new era in which the United States remains in control essentially of the Western Hemisphere, but China is granted a gigantic sphere of influence in Southeast Asia, spanning all the way across to Africa? And Russia presumably expands its sphere of influence into Eastern and Western Europe, as well as into the Middle East. Are we about to carve up the globe into kind of old style 1840s geopolitics, spheres of influence? And that is the big question at the moment. China seems to believe that it's the latter, which would be actually quite grave, because the United States, Latin America, that alone does not mean the United States maintains its global strength and comparative presence. The United States, as the unilateral hegemon on planet Earth, is better for the United States than a world with two other alleged superpowers expanding their spheres of influence at the detriment of the United States. According to the Wall Street Journal, this calculation does not mean that China considers the U.S. action in Venezuela a green light for an immediate action to take back Taiwan. Rather, U.S. action against Maduro by force bolsters China as it gives priority to its core interests, chiefly bringing Taiwan under its control. Beijing issued a policy paper on Latin America in December, suggesting it would not give up its ambitions there. But then, after New Year's Day, Xi dispatched a special envoy to Venezuela with a mission to stop the bleeding. Apparently, the goal was to secure what Beijing called Xi Benpan, the strategic foundation of China's Latin American influence, which meant ensuring repayment of some $10 billion in outstanding debt owed by Venezuela and continued access to the world's largest crude reserves. Now, of course, all of that is in the rearview mirror thanks to the Trump intervention in Venezuela. Now, China has a stack of IOUs from Venezuela and is dealing with a regime that has to put a priority on Trump. White House spokeswoman Anna Kelly said restoring American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere involves enlisting established friends to help bolster mutual security in the region and cultivating new partners in the region. Apparently, again, China may expect the United States will beat a strategic retreat in the Taiwan Strait. Other enticements that Chinese officials are considering involve Beijing potentially agreeing to purchase billions of dollars of long-term treasuries in order to fund the American debt. There's an April summit between Xi and Trump in Beijing. It'll be interesting to see whether China believes that America first means America abandons the Far East, or whether China understands that America first does not quite mean that. According to the Journal, Chinese leadership is hoping to gauge whether Trump's America first focus on the Western Hemisphere is an opening for China to exert more control over its own periphery, or if the Venezuelan operation was merely the first chapter in a global reassertion of American power. And that is the open question at this point. And it'll be interesting, again, to see whether some of the people in, say, the Trump Defense Department, like Elbridge Colby, who suggested shifting resources from the Middle East toward facing down with China, were serious about that. Because facing down with China means preventing their expansion of power in the Far East. Meanwhile, Senate Republicans derailed their effort by Democrats to rebuke President Trump on Venezuela. There was a procedural vote that killed a measure designed to force Trump to seek congressional approval before taking any further military action against Venezuela. Now, realistically, that wouldn't have made a difference. The president has inherent Article 2 power. Very difficult to argue that the president must inform Congress before any further strike, like a single one-off strike on Venezuelan targets. The chamber was deadlocked 50-50. Josh Hawley, Todd Young of Indiana, they both ended up voting against the legislation. The Republicans who voted in favor of the Democratic-led piece of legislation, the resolution, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and, of course, Rand Paul of Kentucky. Democrats are still preparing to force a war powers vote on Greenland because President Trump continues to talk about his desire to take Greenland at all costs and make it our 51st state. The Danish foreign minister came out and said that he doesn't know what Trump is talking about, basically, that there's no Chinese presence in Greenland. So when President Trump says the United States must actively control the entirety of Greenland, as opposed to what we have right now, a security agreement with Denmark in order to build bases in Greenland pretty much willy-nilly. He's like, well, China doesn't have bases in Greenland. The United States does.
We haven't seen a Chinese warship in Greenland for a decade or so. There's absolutely no Chinese investments in Greenland. When I served as Prime Minister, I served Prime Minister twice. We avoided any kind of Chinese investments in infrastructure. 10 years ago, the Road and Belt Initiative, what you have seen in Africa, we avoided all that. We now build new international airports in Greenland. They are funded by Danish money. We had an abandoned American military installation years ago. There was a global tender. I personally intervened in this in order to avoid, any Chinese footprint. So there's absolutely no Chinese footprint in Greenland.
So he is right about that on a technical level for sure. He then said that the United States and Denmark have agreed to disagree over the future of Greenland, which, yeah, again, I don't think the United States is going to be flying F-35s over to Greenland anytime soon, but the president likes this sort of language, apparently.
We therefore still have a fundamental disagreement, but we also agree to disagree. And therefore we will, however, continue to talk. We have decided to form a high-level working group to explore if we can find a common way forward. The group, in our view, should focus on how to address the American security concerns, while at the same time respecting the red lines of the Kingdom of Denmark.
So we'll see what happens there. President Trump did have a funny line. He was asked about acquiring Greenland by force and a buildup. And he was like, they have a force buildup in Greenland?
And the problem is, there's not a thing that Denmark can do about it if Russia or China wants to occupy Greenland. But there's everything we can do. You found that out last week with Venezuela. There's everything we can do about things such as that. Not going to happen. We're not, I can't rely on Denmark being able to fend themselves off. They were talking about they put an extra dog, and they were serious about this. They put an extra dog sled there last month. They added a second dog sled. That's not going to do the trick.
Okay. Fair enough. Except again, the United States already has the legal ability to do a forced buildup in Greenland if we so choose. Meanwhile, the Democrats, the left, they are still having an extraordinarily difficult time on social issues. Obviously, the Supreme Court heard a case yesterday in which the side the Democrats would associate with could not define the word woman. It happened again in the Senate yesterday when a person named Nisha Verma, a doctor, could not define the word woman. Senator Josh Hawley asked for a specific definition, and we are a society that is so smart that we've become apparently incredibly stupid.
Can men get pregnant?
Again, the reason I paused there is I'm not really sure what the goal of the question is.
The goal is just to establish a biological reality. You just said a moment ago that science and evidence should control, not politics.
Absolutely.
So let's just test that proposition. Can men get pregnant?
I take care of people with many identities, but
can men get pregnant?
There are many women that can get pregnant. I do take care of people that don't identify as women. That
Can men get pregnant?
Again, as I'm saying,
Let me just remind you what you testified to a moment ago. Science and evidence should control, not politics. So can men get pregnant? You're a doctor, I think.
Science and evidence should guide medicine.
Do science and evidence tell us that men can get pregnant? Biological men, can they get pregnant?
I also think yes/no questions like this are a political tool. And
no, yes/no questions are about the truth, doctor. Let's not make a mockery of this proceeding.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. I guess the idea here from Democrats is that the personal identity of people, how they self-identify, is so important that we can't just say they're wrong. We can't just say they're wrong. That sympathy must outweigh biological fact. The longer Democrats keep, moving down this road, the worse it's going to be for them, for sure. When it comes to the economy, which of course is going to be the deciding factor in 2026, also in 2028, the question is going to be the future of the American economy. There's been a lot of talk about affordability and campaigning on affordability. President Trump has issued a wide variety of overtures toward affordability over the course of the last couple of weeks. Virtually all of them would have belonged squarely in Democratic circles about 5 seconds ago. Whether that is capping credit card interest rates at 10%, which of course only means that if you have a bad credit score, you won't be able to obtain credit cards, and then you'll have to go to some sort of payday lender, or banning institutional investors from buying single-family homes. Again, the evidence that corporate investors are lowering the housing stock in the United States is nil. It does not exist. So that's not going to do it either. The idea of the federal government buying up mortgage bonds so as to artificially inject liquidity into the mortgage market, which, by the way, will, in the short term, decrease the prices, but in the long term, increase the prices because it'll create inflation. Or issuing $2,000 tariff refund checks, which again is just helicopter money. And none of this is geared toward what we actually need, which is inflation being held steady and wage increases. Nonetheless, the president is a solid politician, and what he's doing is politically popular, according to Harry Enton at CNN. Here's Harry Enton talking about President Trump's credit card policy.
Oftentimes we see issues that divide Americans, liberals and Democrats on one side, conservatives and Republicans on the other. But take a look here. Percentage with credit card debt, 49% of Democrats, 48% of independents, and 51% of Republicans. It is a bipartisan problem in this country. So all of a sudden, Donald Trump is saying, hey, let me find an issue in which I can unite the different factions in this country behind something that I am trying to propose here. This is it, baby. This is an issue that unites Democrats, independents, and Republicans, because the percentage with the credit card debt amongst Republicans, independents, and Democrats is pretty much gosh darn equal.
Okay, so again, a lot of people have credit card debt. That does not mean that good policy is made off the back of simply acknowledging that people have problems. You actually have to have solutions to those problems that don't involve just taking a hammer and smacking something random. Okay, the real question is whether in the future we are going to be able to outcompete our near competitors, like, for example, China. Really interesting piece by Patrick McGee over at the Free Press, talking about what China is focused on versus what the United States is focused on. What McGee suggests is that the United States is very focused on software and the Chinese government is very much focused on hardware. What he says is that there is a risk here that America's grand bet is outgunned by China's more mundane and pragmatic AI strategy, while American companies concentrate resources on a moonshot, investing in frontier models to create a superintelligence to tackle every problem. Chinese companies are rapidly applying good enough AI to leverage their existing superiority in manufacturing and logistics. For the average American, AI means chatbots, Big tech firms are pouring unprecedented sums into chips and data centers to accelerate deep learning. In China, the emphasis is more on deploying similar deep learning networks into every nook and cranny of the economy, giving machines increasing autonomy. AI algorithms are being used to guide robotic arms in factories, screen patients in hospitals, and eliminate defects on the production line. The U.S. is framing AI as a race, with a single winner emerging into what a White House report last year called the new golden age of human flourishing. China is making a more expansive bet. It's not promising a new era that will arrive as soon as AI models scale enough to hit the magic artificial general intelligence moment. It's deploying deep learning models into sectors where it's already strong, like manufacturing, to deliver more immediate results. Google DeepMind CEO Demi Hassabis has said he expects AGI to arrive in as little as 5 to 10 years and says it'll be 10 times bigger than the Industrial Revolution. Chatbots, says this writer, have made mesmerizing progress. But compare that to what's happening in China. Tech giants Baidu and Alibaba are trying to keep up with their competitors in the United States, and they're deploying it in real world scenarios. If China succeeds in their approach, sometimes called embodied AI, the world will grow even more dependent on China in manufacturing and in other areas in which robots and other machines can replace humans. More than 150 Chinese companies are engaged in manufacturing human-like robots, which are trained on complex visual data that could enable them to mimic real workers. China already deploys more industrial robots than the rest of the world combined, and they need it because, of course, they have a huge demographic problem. They don't have enough people, actually. So the question is whether China is going to be able to bootstrap itself to such manufacturing superiority that it won't matter even when we hit AGI. It's sort of a fascinating trade-off. Alrighty, folks, coming up, we'll jump into the latest in the Gaza Strip, where there has been an announcement by the Trump administration that phase 2 is about to begin. What exactly does that mean? We'll get into it. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us. The Trump administration moderates its rhetoric on Minneapolis while Democrats ramp up their own. Plus, are Democrats looking to just fully undermine federal immigration law? Are they putting pedal to the metal? We'll get into that first. The Daily Wire took a story more than 1,500 years old and spent 3 years turning it into a 7-episode cinematic epic that Hollywood wouldn't make and that no other studio would risk funding. The result is the #1 piece of content on dailywire.com. Episodes 1 and 2 of the Pendragon cycle, Rise of the Merlin, are streaming right now with new episodes every Thursday. Yes, that means episode 3 premieres tomorrow. So now's the time to catch up. You can only watch it on Daily Wire Plus with a Daily Wire Plus membership. That includes the all-new Pendragon Pass. The Pendragon Pass gives you 3 months to watch the full series. The first month is free. Join now at dailywireplus.com. While the Trump administration seems to be conciliating its views with regard to ICE's use in Minneapolis, President Trump is making some pretty strong PR moves in order to regain political capital that has been lost in the aftermath of a couple of very controversial and disputed circumstances shootings in Minneapolis by ICE and Border Patrol of American citizens who are out obstructing federal law enforcement. Democrats, by contrast, seem to be consolidating their position, and not only that, going absolutely extreme, which seems to be the pattern. The minute that one political side believes that it has the upper hand, it proceeds to put the pedal to the metal and then alienate the American population. That seems to be what Democrats are intent on doing right now. So President Trump recognizes that the polls right now don't look good for him with regard to ICE operations. Now, that's not true with regard to overall views on what ICE should be doing. Americans do support the mass deportation of particularly criminal illegal immigrants, and there's been no controversy whatsoever in the vast majority of jurisdictions across the United States wherein ICE has been working with local state authorities in order to go into jails and get people who are arrested for crimes and then deporting those people. It is only in places like Minneapolis where there has been resistance to this sort of activity that ICE is then forced to go in with boots on the ground into areas that are not, for example, jails. And presumably in order to increase deportation numbers, there's been talk by, for example, Stephen Miller over at the White House about looking for broader swaths of illegal immigrants to deport. That means the percentage of illegal immigrants who have committed a separate criminal offense or who are alleged to have committed a separate criminal offense and are therefore in jail, being deported as a percentage of all illegal immigrants being deported has dropped pretty precipitously from January until now. And that, on a PR level, is a problem. President Trump recognizes that's a problem. He also recognizes that it is a problem when the lead spokespeople on behalf of these policies seem to make terrible public relations blunders on a regular basis, which is why he effectively demoted Gregory Bovino, who is the Border Patrol officer who is essentially heading up operations in the Minneapolis area on behalf of Border Patrol. Bovino, of course, had suggested in the aftermath of the killing of Alex Preddy that Preddy was attempting to massacre law enforcement. The evidence is very scanty that that was true, and President Trump knows that. So yesterday, the president announced that they're going to de-escalate a little bit. Here he was on Fox News.
So they had good crime numbers, believe it or not. And that's all working out. You know, we have Tom Homan there now. We put him in there. He's great. And they met with the governor, the mayor, everybody else, and we're going to de-escalate a little bit.
He's sending Tom Homan, who is a significantly more professional person, into this area in an attempt to negotiate out what happens next. Trump also advocated for an honest investigation into what happened with regard to Renee Good and Alex Preddy.
Well, you know, we're doing a big investigation. I want to see the investigation. I'm going to be watching over it. I want a very honorable and honest investigation. I have to see it myself.
Well, Trump was asked specifically about Alex Preddy and the description of Preddy as a domestic terrorist or an assassin. And here was President Trump's response.
Certainly he shouldn't have been carrying a gun, but hey, look, bottom line, everybody in this room, we view that as a very unfortunate incident, okay? Everyone, unless you're a stupid person, very, very unfortunate incident. I don't like that he had a gun. I don't like that he had 2 fully loaded magazines. That's a lot of bad stuff. And despite that, I say that's a very unfortunate. What do you think of some Republicans?
And again, he's not criticizing people who are protesting with a gun. He is criticizing people who obstruct law enforcement while carrying weapons, which of course raises the risk of deadly violence in a pretty significant way. And as it turns out, Alex Preddy has a history of physical confrontations with federal law enforcement, according to CNN. Federal immigration officers have been collecting personal information about protesters and agitators in Minneapolis, sources told CNN, and they had documented details about Preddy before he was shot to death on Saturday. Apparently, sources told CNN about a week before his death, he suffered a broken rib when a group of federal officers tackled him while he was protesting their attempt to detain other individuals. And again, these protests are not spontaneous protests. Some of them are not protests at all. Some of them are actual obstruction of federal law enforcement. If you're Renee Good and you take your car and you obstruct federal law enforcement vehicles from being able to move down the road, that is not a protest. That is obstruction of federal law. If you're Alex Preddy and you're getting in the way of ICE being able to do its job, that is not a protest. That is an obstruction of federal law, obviously. The Department of Homeland Security says that DHS law enforcement has no record of that incident. With that said, if it turns out that Preddy is a person, or was a person, who is repeatedly getting into confrontations with law enforcement, that does change a little bit the sort of circumstances surrounding his death. Regardless, President Trump, again, understands he has an excellent weather vane for where the American people are. And that means that if somebody is not representing him well, he is very likely to put them aside. That's exactly what happened, as I say, with Gregory Bovino. Here he was yesterday blaming Bovino and essentially suggesting that Bovino's characterization of events was not right.
I don't think it's a pullback. It's a little bit of a change. Everybody in this room that has a business, you know, you make little changes. You know, Bovino's very good, but he's a pretty out there kind of a guy. And in some cases, that's good. Maybe it wasn't good here.
Now, he is out there still defending Kristi Noem. Already coming up, the president may be out of love with Greg Bovino, but he's still defending Kristi Noem over at the Department of Homeland Security. We'll have to examine why. First, it turns out that actually it's really, really, really important to have life insurance. Like really important because, listen, I'm all about my family. I spend pretty much all my spare moments and many of my not spare moments with my family. And the most important thing to me is making sure that they are safe and secure. But God forbid something happens to me, I have to make sure that they're taken care of. Life insurance is the place to start with that, but it can feel overwhelming to know where to start with life insurance. And that's where our sponsor, Policy Genius, comes in. It's an online marketplace where you can compare quotes from top insurers side by side, completely free. No jumping around between websites, no endless phone calls. What really stands out is their team actually works for you. They're licensed agents who help you figure out what you actually need, not what some company wants to sell you. They walk you through coverage amounts, prices, all of it. No guesswork, just straight answers. They handle the paperwork, they answer your questions, and honestly, they just take that weight off your shoulders. You get clarity on what you need, and you can move forward fast. With the new year coming up, it's the perfect time to lock this in and start 2025 with real peace of mind. Check out Policy Genius. They've got thousands of 5-star reviews from people who finally found the right policy for their needs. You'll thank yourself later. Plan the year knowing you've protected what you built. With Policy Genius, real users have gotten 20-year, $2 million policies for just $53 a month. Head on over to policygenius.com/Shapiro to compare life insurance quotes from top companies. See how much you could save. It's policygenius.com/Shapiro. Also, getting a wide variety of whole food ingredients into my diet, that's a priority this year because I'm traveling, work schedule is busy. Our sponsor, Balance of Nature's whole health system, makes it simple. Their convenient blend of fruits and veggies in easy-to-take capsules is kosher. It ensures I'm getting essential nutrients every day without the hassle of prep work or meal planning. It's an effortless way to support my wellness goals while managing a busy on-the-go lifestyle. Balance of Nature's whole health system supplements are incredibly versatile. They're easy to work into your daily routine. The fiber and spice supplement blends smoothly into your favorite drinks, adding a warm aromatic depth from its spice blend. And if you prefer, you can even open up the fruits and veggies capsules and mix the powder directly into a smoothie or sprinkle it over your meals. What makes these supplements special is they're packed with 47 ingredients from 100% real whole fruits, veggies, spices, fibers, everything from psyllium husk and flaxseed to cinnamon, turmeric, mango, pineapple, wild blueberry, shiitake mushroom, spinach, kale, cayenne pepper, and a lot more. It's a simple way to give your body the nutrition it needs every single day. And I like to pop the Balance of Nature right into my protein smoothie, and that's keeping me healthy. This New Year's, lock in 50% off for 1 year when you subscribe to the whole health system supplements as a preferred customer. Head on over to balanceofnature.com. So Kristi Noem, of course, of the Department of Homeland Security, she's come under extraordinary fire. And frankly, I think a lot of it is justified. I think that she has not done a good job of representing the president publicly. The president, however, is still defending Kristi Noem, who has become the center of this firestorm.
With the shift in Minneapolis and Tom Homan going to Minnesota, do you still have confidence in DHS Secretary Kristi Noem? You brought up the success at the border.
Look,
you do.
She was there with the border. Who closed up the border? She did, with Tom Homan, with the whole group. I mean, they closed up the border. The border is a tremendous success, one of the most secure borders in the entire world. We had a great first term. This term seems to be blowing it away. I mean, the only thing we have is a Minnesota situation, and that is, I believe, easily resolved.
Now, when it comes to Kristi Noem and the characterization of events, perhaps one of the reasons that the president is defending Noem where he wasn't defending Bavino is because Noem is saying that she got instruction, apparently, from Stephen Miller, a close advisor to the president. According to Mediaite, Noem is chalking up her actions in office to the direction of President Trump and Homeland Security advisor Stephen Miller. So immediately upon Preddy's death, Miller had gone on Twitter and he had put out a statement, quote, "An assassin tried to murder federal agents, and this is your response." That was in response to Chris Murphy suggesting that ICE has to leave Minneapolis. And of course, Miller is very close to the president. There's been a lot of talk about whether Miller and Noem are splitting, whether there's been some sort of problems between the two of them. But White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called Miller one of the president's closest aides. Quote, "Stephen Miller is one of President Trump's most trusted and longest serving aides. The president loves Stephen." Noem apparently said to somebody who then related to Axios, which means that she leaked it out. You would imagine that might be Corey Lewandowski. Quote, "Everything I've done at the direction of the president and Stephen." So maybe the idea here is that the president is being told by Kristi Noem that if I go under the bus, I'm taking you with me. That is quite possibly a sort of linkage that is forcing the president or his advisors to defend Noem where they weren't willing to defend Bavino. The bottom line, however, is that I have yet to see a headline emerging specifically regarding Kristi Noem that has been a positive for the administration thus far. Now, President Trump, as part of his reorientation toward ICE operations in Minneapolis, he's been talking with Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, who, again, has been a nefarious character in all of this. He has fomented the chaos in Minnesota. He has created incentive structures for that chaos. He has praised the people who are participating in that chaos. Nonetheless, the president reached out to Walz, and this is sort of the president's personal style, obviously. President Trump likes to reach out to people he perceives to be political enemies, maybe make friends with them, treat them with good grace. He obviously did this to Zohar Mamdani in New York. Now, apparently, he's doing it to Tim Walz. He explained a recent phone call that he had with Tim Walz to Will Cain over on Fox News.
It couldn't have been a nicer conversation. And in fact, I said to my people, I said, it's hard to believe that's the same guy I watch on television or I watch in a debate not doing so well, or because we had a very reasonable conversation, very good conversation. If you believe the conversation, he'd like to get this thing over with.
And so, again, he seems to be optimistic about what he can get Tim Walz to do. Now, Tim Walz seems to have a different viewpoint. And this is where things can shift pretty easily for Democrats. So right now, Democrats believe that they have the upper hand. Democrats believe that they have gotten President Trump to cave on policy. Now, realistically, they've not. Nothing has actually changed in terms of the operations that ICE is slated to perform in Minneapolis. The president has shifted around some faces. He's brought in people who are probably calmer personages in order to implement his policy preferences. Tom Homan is extraordinarily professional. Again, from the very beginning, when Renee Good was shot, Tom Homan said there will be a full investigation. Law enforcement has to do its job. That is the proper response when there is a disputed shooting. And he said the same thing about Alex Preddy. He was not out front making absurdly overreaching statements about what happened in these cases where there was full-scale video available. And so Tom Homan being there makes a big difference. Democrats, however, seem to believe that now there is a bit of political blood in the water and they can go all the way. So Tim Walz is using this as an opportunity. Again, remember, Tim Walz was so disgraced 6 weeks ago that he had to drop out of his gubernatorial race. He was running again for governor, a third term in Minnesota, and he had to drop it specifically because of all the fraud allegations swirling around his administration. Politically, there is no one happier than Tim Walz about what's going on in Minnesota, which is presumably why he is helping to foment all of the problems in Minnesota, talking about how ICE agents are Gestapo-like and how you need to go out there and cause good trouble and how nonviolent resistance, wink, wink, is the way. Tim Walz has been an instigator in this entire process. So has the Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Frey. Well, now Tim Walz believes that he's won some sort of cheap political victory here. He's using the opportunity to slam various members of the Trump administration, even after Trump reached out to him. Here he was yesterday slamming the vice president, J.D. Vance.
I would beat the shit out of him now if I could, and I would call that out. I mean, that's just different. In verbally going at it, my argument is much better. In making the case that housing prices are up because of immigration and that we should build on federal lands, it was such a crazy thing. But then when I watched him, I got sucked into that. And if you remember, this was right in that moment of eating dogs and cats. I took that bait and thought that that was the argument of how outrageous it was. That was not the argument.
And he said that your cops are liars. He said that the ICE agents aren't.
They all did. That's exactly right. That this is the problem with them. And well, the president said it, that we told them to stand down. Do you think they would do that? Do you think that police would not protect citizens, no matter if I'm like, oh, don't do this? But yes. Well, this is the whole paradox with these guys. They don't back the blue. They don't back police. January 6th proved that. Fanone and the rest of those guys will tell you that.
Again, the idea that Democrats have backed the blue is insane. The fact that the idea that Tim Walz has backed the blue is crazy. One of the big problems you have in major blue city police departments is that the political leadership of the police departments have to work hand in glove with the state officials, people like Tim Walz. Or if you're in California, you have to work with the mayor if you're in Los Angeles, or with the governor. And what that tends to mean is that the people who are actually on the ground holding the line have pretty significant disagreements with the people who are the heads of their departments, which is why you have seen in major police forces across the United States real trouble recruiting and retaining police officers. Tim Walz went out of his way to slam Kristi Noem as well.
It's very disheartening to me to see the president say Kristi Noem's doing a great job. I'm not sure there's been anybody more incompetent or cruel that's ever served in a cabinet position than her, and this is on her.
Okay, so again, this is going to be the shtick. Now, this is going to culminate in an attempt to totally undermine law enforcement. So Jacob Frey, now remember, the president reached out to Frey and had a conversation with him and then put out a statement on Truth Social about how well the conversation went. Well, Frey is now digging in, saying that he is not going to facilitate the performance of immigration law. Quote, today, Chief O'Hara and I met with Border Czar Homan and had a productive conversation. I reiterated that my main ask is for Operation Metro Surge to end as quickly as possible. Public safety works best when it's built on community trust, not tactics that create fear or division. I shared with Mr. Homan the serious negative impacts this operation has had on Minneapolis and surrounding communities, as well as the strain it has placed on our local police officers. I also made it clear that Minneapolis does not and will not enforce federal immigration laws, and that we will remain focused on keeping our neighbors and streets safe. City leaders will continue to stay in conversation with Mr. Homan and his team. So in other words, he is not going to change one iota of what he has been doing. He is going to demand that the federal government stop performing federal immigration law. And when he says that he wants to keep people safe, but they're not going to perform federal immigration law, understand what that means. What he means when he says that is that if there are local law enforcement agencies, if Minneapolis PD picks up a person and that person goes to jail, and they know that person is an illegal immigrant, and that person makes bail, for example, that will never be reported to ICE. That is what they mean. That is what they mean. They mean that you will require a full-scale conviction and prison term for the person at the other end. Maybe State Department of Corrections hands that person over to ICE. But at first encounter, criminals will not be interfacing with ICE. That is what he means, which means the continual undermining of federal law, obviously. Meanwhile, Keith Ellison, the terrible attorney general of the state of Minnesota, he's out there suggesting that perhaps he is going to prosecute ICE officers.
Our hope is that the order will continue to preserve, protect, prohibit altering, and gain access so that we can investigate this case ourselves. As you know, in your audience, I want them to know that there is no legal bar to the state prosecuting anyone who commits a crime in our state, including a federal official. There are certain qualified immunities that apply, but we believe that they can be overcome.
Okay. Meanwhile, Governor Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, who of course would like to run for president, it is now becoming, it's amazing how quickly the Democratic Party higher echelons are captured by the radicals in their base, believing they need them in order to win presidential primaries. Shapiro wants to run for president of the United States. And he is out there saying ICE's mission needs to be terminated. Again, terminating ICE's mission without explaining how you're going to effectuate immigration law being enforced means nullification of federal law on behalf of local and state concerns, which has a very bad history in the United States.
To me, it is very clear that the mission the president and Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance and all of them sent these federal officials on is a mission to violate people's constitutional rights. And it is clear that the mission needs to be terminated immediately. Period. Hard stop. And while police want to have tools in their hands to be able to do their good work in the community, the most important tool they need is to have trust with the community. And the other thing that this administration has done is violated that trust with the American people and law enforcement, and collectively all of that makes us less safe. The mission needs to be terminated. It needs to end right now.
Okay, now again, this has become the going talking point for Democratic candidates and apparently for Democratic law enforcement officers around the country. Philadelphia's awful District Attorney Larry Krasner, who's done just a terrible job of ensuring that the law is enforced in his city, he is vowing to utilize law enforcement resources to hunt down ICE agents.
If we have to hunt you down the way they hunted down Nazis for decades, we will find your identities, we will find you, we will achieve justice.
Okay, again, this is kind of insane stuff. And it culminates in what Democrats are now declaring they want on the federal level. So according to Bill Malugin reporting for Fox, Democrats are now demanding judicial warrants for all ICE arrests. What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, as he says, that will take a massive number of targets off the board for ICE. They would only be able to go after illegal immigrants who have committed a new federal crime after entering the United States illegally. State and local crimes would not apply because the feds don't enforce state and local crimes. Remember, if ICE comes and arrests somebody, detains somebody based on a state level, they are not prosecuting that person. They're looking to deport that person. It's the state that is supposed to prosecute on the basis. So if you require a judicial warrant on the federal level, that judicial warrant presumably has to be for a separate crime. On the federal level, that would have to be a federal crime. For example, says Bill Malugin, if an illegal immigrant gets arrested in Minnesota for a DUI crash causing great bodily injury, a state crime, and then bonds out of jail, ICE would not be able to target him for arrest because there would be no judicial warrant. It's not a federal crime. ICE would not be able to target anyone for just being in the U.S. illegally. They would have to wait for a federal crime to be committed. Then a federal judge would have to sign off on probable cause for arrest. It would cripple any hopes of mass deportations or widespread immigration enforcement. Warrants are not required for ICE arrests under U.S. law right now. They simply need probable cause that the target is detainable and deportable on immigration grounds, and then they use an I-200 and I-205 civil administrative warrant. The most common judicial warrant ICE uses to target aliens right now is for illegal reentry, a federal felony when a deported alien has reentered the United States after deportation. But that's a limited population because a huge number of illegal immigrants, most of them actually, have not been repeat deportees. ICE does need a judicial warrant to enter homes. That's a different question. Right? We had this conversation earlier this week. The administration is trying to claim that an administrative warrant plus probable cause means they can bust into a home. That is hotly contested in the courts of law. But for an arrest, you don't need a judicial warrant. An administrative warrant for illegal immigration is enough to effectuate a deportation based on an arrest. One ICE contact in a sanctuary city told Malugin, quote, if we need a judicial warrant for every arrest, we would have maybe 15 arrests in a year in his city. Apparently, this is what Democrats are pushing for. Meredith Lee Hill, congressional reporter for Politico, says the Democrats are coalescing around a number of DHS bill changes, including requiring judicial warrants for immigration arrests, mandating the federal agents identify themselves, requiring DHS to cooperate with state and local investigations, and limiting the mission creep of federal agencies. Also, end roving patrols and profiling and end arrest quotas. So, basically, hamstring federal law. Make sure that illegal immigration can never be stopped. That is the Democrat goal. And that is a massive overreach. Because here's what Americans want. Americans would like, as a first step, they wanted the border closed. Trump did that. They want criminal illegal immigrants deported. The Trump administration has been doing that very successfully in virtually all jurisdictions outside of places like Minneapolis, places where you have Democratic officials and law enforcement attempting to gin up chaos. And Democrats, on the other hand, apparently would like for none of that to happen. Apparently, they're pushing for processes that make even the arrest of criminal illegal immigrants, people arrested for state-level crimes, nearly impossible. Well, if that's their goal, then they're going to snatch political defeat from the jaws of victory. If they believe, like right now, they should simply claim victory. On a political level, they should say, we got the Trump administration to moderate. We've gotten Greg Bovino out. Tom Homan is a more responsible actor. We thank the Trump administration for replacing an incompetent person with a more competent person. We're looking forward to working with Tom Homan. Everything calms down. Everything goes back to status quo ante. They claim a victory. That's what they should do. Instead, again, the minute right now that either party senses momentum, they put pedal to the metal, and then they proceed to overreach so dramatically that the American people are repulsed and react in disgust to that agenda. Now, listen, the Democratic politicians, I get it. Some of them are being driven by a media and celebrity culture that has decided that this is the new gigantic outrage of the day and everyone must speak out. This is our new civil rights movement. As we've discussed before, the Democratic base is constantly in search of an animating principle. And that animating principle is supposed to be a pale knockoff of the civil rights movement of the 60s. And so we've had that with regard to gay rights. And then we had that with regard to transgenderism. And now we're getting that with regard to illegal immigration. The jackbooted thugs, they're enforcing laws that are discriminating against wide classes of people. They're always looking for their moment to do a Selma Bridge. Well, the problem is that those moments are rare because, thank God, in America, that sort of stuff, that sort of policy has been rather outre for, half a century. Meaning that just in terms of generic public policy, every country has to enforce its border and every country has to make sure that illegal immigrants are deported. There's nothing new about that. But Democrats, and particularly radical activist class Democrats, are looking always for their new moment to be involved in a civil rights movement. And what that means is that they push very hard. The minute that they see anything that even remotely resembles that thing, they go for it, whole scale. And this is how you end up with, for example, Scott Galloway suggesting that Democrats should conduct Nuremberg trials against law enforcement, federal law enforcement.
The difference between being right and being effective. And we're angry, and I get it. Protesting is powerful. Promising them that there will be an accountability. And I've said this. I think there should be something equivalent to the Nuremberg trials after this is all over.
I agree.
And to make it clear that once we're back in power, which we will be, this is going to happen. And the statute of limitations on murder is
0.
Never.
Okay, so, again, this sort of language is unhelpful. I actually think Scott Galloway has a lot of interesting things to say. This is not one of them. Kara Swisher, on the same podcast, suggested that Stephen Miller has blood on his hands and should be put in jail.
And I would last like to call out Stephen Miller, who is in the center of this. We always focus on Trump, as we often focus on the top people. But Stephen Miller, like a man named Ben Detson, he was the one who created the internment camps for Japanese. Heinrich Himmler in the Nazi regime. This is what he is. And he of course, Trump gets most of the blame being at the top, but people like Stephen Miller, will go down in history as evil, had blood on his hands, and should be jailed at the very end of this. And you're absolutely right.
Okay, again, comparing Stephen Miller to Heinrich Himmler is a pretty astonishing leap. It's a pretty astonishing leap from Kara Swisher. And you have the entire celebrity class who, of course, have now been reanimated. They found their new cause. A year ago, it was wearing the Hamas pins at the Oscars. This year, presumably, it will all be about ICE. Katy Perry, who is now dating Justin Trudeau, the handsome Bernie Sanders of the North. Katy Perry was out there commenting on ICE. She said, call your senator. She put this up on Instagram. We have until Friday, January 30th to block $10 billion from going through to ICE. Right? This is her Instagram. And then she put up a phone number and all the rest of it because it's time to turn anger into action. Okay. Meanwhile, Natalie Portman, again, I'm not sure why we should treat the musings of actors as particularly important, but they clearly do. Natalie Portman suggested that she's never been sadder to be an American. Now, last I checked, I'm not even sure that Natalie Portman chiefly resides in the United States.
I could not be prouder to be American right now by the way the Americans are acting. And I could not be sadder to be American right now with the way the government is behaving.
Now, again, the musings of actors mean very little, but they do mean a lot in sort of democratic upper echelon circles. By the way, Natalie Portman does primarily reside in France, not in the United States. Olivia Wilde was doing the same routine. Here she was suggesting that ICE is a criminal organization.
We can't go another day just sort of accepting this as our new norm. It's outrageous. People are being murdered. And I don't want to normalize seeing people being murdered on the internet, on film. It's hideous. And so if we can do anything out here to support the movement to cast ICE out, to delegitimize this unbelievably criminal organization, then that's what we should be doing.
The celebrity class doesn't mean a lot, but when they speak with one voice, the people who tend to hear that are the people they go to cocktail parties with, and that would be the Democratic frontrunners. That'd be people like Wes Moore in Maryland, or people like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, or people like Gavin Newsom in California. Ethan Hawke, who is currently nominated for Best Actor for a movie called Blue Moon, he says there's fear in the air. I do. Again, I'm sorry, there isn't. There just isn't. There's this notion that there is an evanescent fear in the air. That you're just walking around and you can feel the fear. I promise you, Ethan Hawke is not walking around in fear. He isn't.
I never felt scared about what I was going to say until the last couple of years, where you feel like, oh, I have to be careful, or what? I don't know, but there's a kind of fear in the air that I've never felt before, and it's not America. To get to be an artist in a free country, I've had enough of an education to know what a privilege that is, and I don't feel that way anymore.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. You're out there making movies every day. My favorite thing about modern America is where people who have all the rights and privileges of being a modern American suggest that they are living in deep fear when they clearly are not. He's speaking into a microphone on camera. You know what people in totalitarian regimes don't do? That thing, because they know what comes next and it ain't good. Democrats are, meanwhile, attempting to obstruct federal attempts to look into Minnesota state voter rolls. Now, I've never understood the controversy over transparency when it comes to voter rolls. Obviously, we all have a very strong interest in ensuring that people who are not registered to vote should not be on voter rolls, that we don't have duplications on voter rolls, that we don't have people who are capable even of voting more than once. And so the pushback has never made any sense to me at all. According to the New York Times, after federal immigration agents shot and killed an American citizen in Minneapolis for the second time this month, Attorney General Pam Bondi sent a letter to Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota that outlined what she described as 3 simple steps to bring back law and order. The third step there was to allow the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice to access voter rolls to confirm that Minnesota's voter registration practices comply with federal law. Minnesota's Secretary of State, Steve Simon, a Democrat, swiftly rejected the demand, calling it an outrageous attempt to coerce Minnesota into giving the federal government private data on millions of U.S. citizens in violation of state and federal law. Now, I'm not sure why, presumably, that is a violation of state and federal law. I mean, there are addresses. Those addresses are publicly available virtually all over the United States. The complete unredacted voter files include personal identifying information like driver's license numbers and social security numbers. The Justice Department presumably wants those files because they are attempting to clean up the voter rolls. At least 11 states have already complied on all this. Democrats are rejecting this. Many of them are suggesting that they are worried about the laws preventing the transfer of private information. By the way, I will note at this point that these same Democrats have no problem at all with the idea of a gigantic gun registry in which every gun that you buy goes on a gun registry, no matter if you buy it from a friend or buy it from a private seller or anything. They're perfectly happy to register everyone's private information federally in terms of your gun ownership, in violation of the Second Amendment in all likelihood. But when it comes to voting, this is where they're going to draw the line. So, do states have a right to withhold the data? Totally unclear at this point, but they are very upset about it. Tim Walz, for his part, is saying that he's not going to comply.
And one of the things we're always very proud of, we're either first or second in the country for voter turnout. And we have the safest, most secure, most well-attended elections in the country. And we like to talk about that. And what I can assure everyone in this country is we will break that record in November at this midterm.
Again, he is suggesting that this is all going to turn into a big vote for Democrats, obviously. Ilhan Omar, for her part, representative from Minnesota, put out a statement, quote, ICE will leave Minnesota if you hand over your voter rolls, tells you everything you need to know. This was never about immigration or fraud. It was always about rigging elections. I have a question. How precisely would transparency in the voter rolls allow for the rigging of elections? I'm going to need like an explainer. Like how do you get from point A, voter rolls, to point B, rigging elections? The answer is you don't. It's all political nonsense. Ilhan Omar, however, has been in a fair bit of political trouble because, of course, there are a bunch of investigations facing Ilhan Omar. According to the Wall Street Journal, President Trump suggested in a social media post on Monday that Omar profited from the state's massive welfare fraud scandal and said that the Justice Department is currently scrutinizing her. Representative James Comer of Kentucky, chairman of the House Oversight Committee, has also suggested that he might subpoena Omar's husband after the pair disclosed a significant increase in financial assets. So Ilhan Omar, obviously, listen, she's got a bunch of sketchy circumstances surrounding her. Omar's most recent financial disclosure for May 2025 showed that she and her husband have assets between $6 and $30 million, which are up from 1 year earlier when they reported between $37,000 and $208,000. What now? What? I mean, that's NBA star level pay for Ilhan Omar and her husband. Omar's husband, the political consultant Tim Minot, is involved with a variety of businesses, including a venture capital management firm in Washington, D.C., and a winery in Santa Rosa, California. Well, unless that is the most successful winery in history, I'm having a hard time seeing this. It was the significant increase in the valuation of the capital management firm and winery that were the drivers of the couple's jump in assets. Jacqueline Rogers, an Omar spokeswoman, said, quote, she does not have millions in the bank. The value range listed for the assets reflects the full cost assessment of the businesses, in which her husband is one of several partners and does not reflect her husband's individual share. Obviously, Ilhan Omar has been involved, again, in a wide variety of suspicious circumstances regarding her district. The Washington Free Beacon, by the way, reports that the House Ethics Committee requires reporting only her husband's stake, not the full value of the LLC. So that appears not to be true. At the same time, apparently, there are more investigations coming. According to Fox News' Elizabeth McDonald, it would be reasonable for the media to ask what is going on with Ilhan Omar's husband's winery. Omar valued it at up to $5 million on her 2025 financial disclosures. All we can find is that ESTCRU LLC was registered as an LLC in Santa Rosa, California. We can't find a physical winery. It had promoted wine products, but there's little evidence of a functioning winery today. The business's website for purchasing wine doesn't work. The listed phone number is disconnected. Its social media has been inactive since early 2023. The winery has also been tied to at least one investor lawsuit against her husband, his partner, and the winery, alleging misrepresentation of the business as a legitimate company, and that was reportedly settled. One investor named Naeem Mode alleged they persuaded him to invest $300,000 in the winery based on promises his money would be tripled within 18 months with 10% monthly interest if it wasn't paid back on time. Apparently, the $300,000 investment was returned about a month late. None of the promised profits were delivered. His complaint sought at least $780,000 in damages. That is a massive jump in valuation. So something is going on pretty clearly. Now, obviously, Ilhan Omar is one of the more controversial political figures in the country, and for good reason, given her statements in support of a wide variety of enemies of the United States, up to and including an attempt before she was in Congress to write a letter, a sympathetic letter to a person on behalf of a person who tries to join ISIS. Well, yesterday, there is a terrible circumstance at a town hall in Minneapolis where a man apparently got up. This person appears to be a right-winger who obviously is, shall we say, less than hinged. And he got up and he sprayed a substance at her. Now, this stuff is really, really dangerous. Again, it doesn't matter whether it's right or whether it's left. Physical altercations with people on the basis of politics is not an American thing. It is not. Do not do this, okay? And frankly, we're quite lucky as a country that this person was spraying a substance and not bullets. The fact that we have politicians who are in close proximity with the population on a widespread level means that there is the opportunity in many open circumstances like this to do physical violence. And this is a reminder of that. It's dangerous stuff. Here's some of the video.
And DHS Secretary Kristi Noem must resign or face impeachment.
You must resign.
Security tackled this person, apparently who was sitting up near the front. For those who can't see, he sprayed something on her and then he was tackled. He gets in very close proximity to her. There's another angle, and he appears to be spraying her, and then he starts yelling at her. I mean, by the way, piss poor job by security there. Really, really bad job by security. They only get him afterward. As soon as the man gets up and starts walking toward Ilhan Omar, they need to tackle him. That is a bad job by the security team right there. But again, we're living in a very fraught time. A lot of dangerous people out there. The suspect here sprayed something. We don't know what that was, but again, we live in a world where it could have been an asset. It could have been a gun. I mean, this is dangerous stuff. It needs to stop. It needs to stop. I don't care about the politics. It needs to stop. It really does. This is why we have voting in this country. This is why we have checks and balances in this country. This is why we have free press in this country. That is, and we've had too many circumstances over the course of the past 15 years in which what was sprayed was not, in fact, a substance, a chemical substance or something, but was bullets. Whether it is the congressional baseball shooting, which again has come a kind of memory hold, or whether it is the murder of Charlie Kirk. This stuff is unbelievably dangerous. Okay, meanwhile, the president of the United States is signaling the possibility of action in Iran, given the fact that Iran appears to have mowed down some tens of thousands of protesters by they're kind of widely variant estimates as to how many people the Iranian regime killed over the course of a couple of days amidst those gigantic protests across the country. The low-end estimates put it in the thousands. The high-end estimates are putting it well over 30,000. There is footage of gigantic rooms of body bags. There are reports that are coming out that are really ugly. Obviously, full information is not available because Iran is a dictatorship and because they've shut down the internet for the past several weeks and plan on shutting it down for the next couple of months minimum. Well, President Trump put up a post on Truth Social yesterday warning Iran that they were playing with fire. Quote, a massive armada is heading to Iran. It is moving quickly with great power, enthusiasm, and purpose. It is a larger fleet headed by the great aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln than that sent to Venezuela. Like with Venezuela, it is ready, willing, and able to rapidly fulfill its mission with speed and violence if necessary. Hopefully, Iran will quickly come to the table and negotiate a fair and equitable deal. No nuclear weapons. That is good for all parties. Time is running out. It's truly of the essence. As I told Iran once before, make a deal. They didn't. And there was Operation Midnight Hammer, a major destruction of Iran. The next attack will be far worse. Don't make that happen again. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Now, there's some people out there who are suggesting this is, quote unquote, wag the dog, that the president is having domestic troubles, and therefore he's attempting to launch a war action against Iran. That's stupid. I'm sorry, that's dumb. He literally drew a red line. The red line was, don't kill protesters. They proceeded to mow down protesters in the streets. He said, stay in the streets, help is on the way. That happened before the shootings in Minneapolis. No, this is not a wag the dog scenario. This is the president paying off the promise that he made to the Iranian people if he decides to act in any coherent and cohesive way here. Now, as for the call for negotiations, frankly, I think that is going to be unsuccessful. The Iranians have demonstrated time and again they have no intention of giving up their nuclear program, which is the thing that they need to do. And by the way, even giving up their nuclear program wouldn't solve the problem of you just mowed down tens of thousands of your own citizens. Those people aren't going to become alive again after the president promised them that help was on the way. So it seems that action in Iran could quite possibly be imminent. Again, you're going to hear the usual caterwauling from the usual suspects about how America is about to be drawn into an Iraq-like war. No, that's not going to happen. Please stop with the horseshit. Truthfully, it is an amazing thing to watch critics on the isolationist right keep characterizing Donald J. Trump as George W. Bush circa 2003. It's nonsense. It's just stupid. You were wrong about the first Iran strike last year. You were wrong about the killing of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian terror master. You were wrong about the taking of Nicolas Maduro. In fact, I'm hard-pressed to see where you have been right about President Trump's foreign policy a single time. So, yeah, I'm going to take it with a bit of a grain of salt when you guys suggest that if the president chooses to deploy air power in order to do serious harm to the top levels of the regime, this is somehow going to descend the United States into hundreds of thousands of American troops standing around in Tehran. Obviously, Iran is attempting to reconstitute some sort of regional power. President Trump, on Truth Social, warned Iraq against the reinstallation of their former prime minister, who was effectively an Iranian cat's paw. Obviously, Iraq is a very fractured country. The Iraqi population is majority Shia, just like Iran. It's about 60 to 65% of the population. So Iran is closely aligned with Iraq. That was one of the problems with the deposing of Saddam Hussein and the non-replacement of that regime by some sort of functioning government in the short term is the Shia uprising. That was a huge problem. Well, the president put out a statement the other day. I'm hearing that the great country of Iraq might make a very bad choice by reinstalling Nouri al-Maliki as prime minister. Last time Maliki was in power, the country descended into poverty and total chaos. That should not be allowed to happen again. Because of his insane policies and ideologies, if elected, the United States of America will no longer help Iraq. And if we are not there to help, Iraq has zero chance of success, prosperity, or freedom. Make Iraq great again. And again, that seems to be, a well-calibrated shot across the bow with regard to Iraq. Not that we are going to take military action in Iraq, but that if Iraq is reliant on American resources or defense, them allying with Iran is a bad idea. Now, all of this is part of a Middle East-wide recalibration that has happened in the aftermath of the 12-day war and the utter destruction of Iran's terror arms across the Middle East. Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudi regime seem to be completely realigning away, actually, from the Abraham Accords, away from UAE, away from many of the interests of the United States, and toward a new sort of Sunni triangle that would essentially be Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. In other words, the reason that Saudi was approaching Israel about the Abraham Accords a couple of years ago is because they were afraid of Iran. Then Israel proceeded to wreck Iran and make clear that it was a paper tiger. And now, apparently, what the Saudis are most afraid of, is actual regime change in Iran, which is astonishing. What they would prefer is a failed state in Iran, led by a weakened malocracy that is incapable of threatening Saudi Arabia, but also is not a threat to become a functioning country. That seems to be what the Saudis want. What they are deeply afraid of is a secularist, pro-American, pro-Israel regime in Iran, or at least Israel-friendly regime in Iran, that would recalibrate the math in the Middle East and make Saudi a secondary power, because Iran, of course, has massive oil and natural gas resources. Iran has a young population, a fairly secularized population, and if it had a different leadership, a real chance at being a regional heavyweight. Saudi doesn't like that. So Saudi didn't like that Iran was a threat to it on the military level, and so they liked it when the United States and Israel struck at Iran. But now that Iran has been laid flat, what they would really prefer is for Iran to remain there rather than being able to recover as a functioning, solidified state. And so Saudi instead seems to be making time with the Turks. The Turkish government, by the way, again, one of the major blunders, I believe, of the Trump administration and Tom Barrack, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, is the attempt to treat Turkey as an erstwhile ally of the United States. They absolutely 100% are not. There is no evidence that the Islamist government of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who, again, has supported Hamas terrorists in thoroughgoing fashion, that they have the best interests of the West at heart. The fact is that Turkey never should have been brought alongside NATO. The only reason it was is a counterweight to Russia. And it is for that reason, with regard to Saudi Arabia, that yesterday, Mohammed bin Salman actually told Iran he will not allow the use of Saudi airspace for any strike against Iran. Well, I mean, let's be real about this. He ain't stopping no one. Okay, Mohammed bin Salman may have to say that for public relations purposes. If the United States chooses to use Saudi airspace, the Saudis ain't exactly going to be trying to shoot down American F-16s. That's silly talk. And he's trying to counter-signal. He's trying to signal at his young and very, very unemployed population that he is not taking sides with the United States against the malocracy. That is what is happening with regard to Saudi Arabia. It's kind of tragic because Saudi, I thought, had a shot at modernization. But the more they draw into the orbit of Turkey, the more they alienate the West, the more they try to stop the burgeoning peace that could be happening in the Middle East, the worse things are going to get for the Saudi regime in the short term and in the midterm. Meanwhile, on the economic front, the big news of the day is that Amazon is prepared to lay off around 16,000 corporate employees. According to the Wall Street Journal, the first round of cuts in October led to around 14,000 white-collar employees receiving pink slips. At the time, people familiar with Amazon's plans said the company was targeting around 30,000 job cuts. That's 10% of the corporate workforce. One of the reasons for this is the effectiveness of AI. On Tuesday, Amazon said it was shutting down its Fresh & Go grocery stores after deciding to expand its focus on Whole Foods and same-day deliveries of fresh food from warehouses. So everybody who is working for the Fresh & Go businesses will be laid off. There was sort of a recalibration of how the company was working during the pandemic when there was rapid expansion and everybody was ordering to their house. And now, obviously, the market has changed again. But AI obviously means that a lot of employees become expendable. And this is one of the temporary hiccups that is going to emerge from AI. AI will make the economy significantly more productive. Productivity is going to go up radically, but you're going to require fewer employees to do the same work. And it's going to take a little while for the job market to adjust to all of that, which presumably is one reason why there is a piece today in the Wall Street Journal by David Malpass. Malpass he was the undersecretary of the Treasury under President Trump and president of the World Bank. And Malpass points out that the Federal Reserve should really have one mandate and one mandate only. So the Federal Reserve has a dual mandate to keep unemployment low and to keep inflation low. I've been arguing for literally years that this is stupid. Those two mandates are very often in conflict with one another. Because sometimes, in order to keep the inflation low, you actually have to worry less about job creation. You have to worry more about, monetary policy. Malpass says, in his Davos speech last week, President Trump asked why the interest rate is so much higher on U.S. Treasury debt than on bonds of weaker countries. Good question. The U.S. economy is strong. The default risk is low, so why the higher yield? For 10-year debt, we are paying 4.2%. Japan pays 2.3%. One reason for the high long-term rates is the still high short-term interest rate. The Federal Reserve sets the short-term rate, but its models use backward-looking inflation data and treat growth as inflationary, leaving rates too high. But cutting short-term rates without reforming the Fed's economic models risks higher long-term rates and a sell-off in the dollar. After the Fed cut rates by 0.5 percentage point in September 2024, long-term yields went up by 0.5 points, not down. Markets were aghast at the political timing of the rate cut. Sweeping reforms in the Fed's economic models to defend the dollar offer a straightforward path to lower interest rates across the yield curve, short-term and long-term. The Fed's models ignore the effects of dollar weakness on inflation and interest rates and treat faster growth as a cause of inflation, says Malpass. Already, many at the Fed argue U.S. growth is too fast and unemployment too low for the Fed to cut rates. In Davos, the president trashed this illogic. If a country is doing well, why is it bad news for financial markets? And why does the Fed set its rate higher, not lower? Sound money and a stable dollar are at the core of the supply-side model of booming economic growth. While the Fed wants to focus attention on its independence, the problem is the Fed's anti-growth models undercut the dollar and keep interest rates and bond yields high. So, essentially, the basic idea here should be monetary stability, not worries about job markets heating up or cooling down. Defend the dollar, in other words. So he makes the case that the Fed's monetary policy, backward-looking inflation targeting, non-accelerating rate of unemployment, limits to growth, they take direct aim at supply-side policies to boost energy production, cut tax rates, and improve regulation. The model set a ceiling on the growth rate and a floor on the unemployment rate. And this is exactly right. This is exactly right. Because those two things are not always connected. And the idea that economic growth is inherently connected to job growth, that's true, kind of, over the long term, but they are not necessarily connected in the short term. So defending the dollar is a good thing. It is a necessary thing. So he says U.S. bond yields and mortgage rates could be substantially lower if U.S. policy defended the dollar and strengthened market confidence and trust. The path is easily available to Mr. Trump by stating his administration wants the dollar to be stable, not weak. That would cause more global investment in dollar-denominated assets, including stablecoins, an economic home run. It would also reverse the Biden administration's weakness, a political home run, and it would allow markets to help the Fed decide to lower the short-term rate. That's right, because what the Fed is worried about right now is dollar instability. The dollar is worth less on the open market, and they don't want to inflate the dollar. So, again, that seems to be the right answer on all of this. We'll see whether the Trump administration follows suit. Well, today we also have a couple of MAHA updates for you, the Make America Healthy Again updates for you, brought to you by our friends over at Balance of Nature. Well, there are a couple of them. One is that apparently the Trump administration has decided not to increase Medicare reimbursement rates to the insurers. It'll be interesting to see how this plays in terms of coverage for older people who are reliant on Medicare. One of the biggest problems, obviously, is that when you subsidize Medicare and you keep increasing the reimbursement rates, that costs the taxpayers. On the other hand, when you don't increase those rates, then the insurers are unable to absorb the costs because it turns out that people who are older require a lot of medication and a lot of care. And so you may see some menu options drop off of Medicare because of the lower reimbursement rates. This is presumably also why you saw shares drop for United Health Group and also Humana and CVS Health. Apparently, $96 billion in market capitalization was wiped out on Tuesday. According to the Wall Street Journal, the proposal dealt a blow to insurance companies that have been pushing to turn around a business that's central to their finances and hopes for growth. Medicare Advantage, that is the private insurer version of the federal program for older and disabled Americans, generated an estimated $500 billion in revenue for the industry as a whole last year. Such revenue was a long key driver of growth and profits until the fact that the Medicare reimbursement rates went down. So the industry is likely to go to a playbook where they pull back some offerings, trim extra benefits like cash cards used for health expenses, and offer plan designs with more cost controls. So again, fascinating to see how the administration is trying to bend the cost curve. One of the realities of a government-run system, which is what Medicare effectively is that you can choose between a few things. You can choose between quality, you can choose between universality, you can choose between cost. You can't have all three of those things. You can't have low cost, universality, and quality. It just doesn't work that way. In the free market, by the way, you can have near universality, low cost, and high quality. That is the guarantee of the free market. In the non-free market, you end up with universality, but typically higher cost and also poorer quality. That is the typical. And it seems that Medicare is moving in that direction. The notion that insurance companies, by the way, are simply ripping off the federal government with regard to Medicare, that is generally untrue. The profit margins for these insurance companies is not all of that high. Well, in other MAHA news, apparently Barry Weiss over at CBS News is planning to bring on board Andrew Huberman, who has a huge health podcast, which is really listenable. This, of course, is driving some people absolutely up a wall. Weiss apparently is going to announce a host of new contributors to the network. That includes Andrew Huberman, who currently has 7.3 million subscribers on YouTube. He pushes high protein consumption, among other things, and elevated cortisol levels in the mornings. He obviously has this entire schedule where you get up in the morning, you go out and you spend 15 minutes in the sun, and all the rest. Naturally, there are some people who are upset with Huberman because anytime you popularize science, you are very frequently going to make a mistake, or you're going to simplify beyond the actual studies. However, what Barry is attempting to do by bringing on board people who actually have some level of talent and followership is smart. It is smart what she is attempting to do. And I know a lot of people are angry that Barry is even there, and that is clearly evident from the coverage. It's like, how dare she upend all of the amazing systems at CBS News? Well, I mean, you could hardly have done worse at CBS News, and Barry seems to be shaking things up in some pretty interesting ways. This New Year's, by the way, lock in 50% off for 1 year when you subscribe to the Whole Health System supplements as a preferred customer at Balance of Nature. Head on over to balanceofnature.com. Alrighty, coming up, we'll get into an announcement from Yale that is quite fascinating, actually. The show continues for our members right now. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.